When Vicky Granger was preparing to divorce me for her senior, she got into a car accident and fell into a coma. Her soul, however, remained trapped by my side, while I pretended not to see her. The doctors said she might never wake up again. Her senior immediately distanced himself from her, quickly announcing his relationship with someone else. Later, when Vicky regained consciousness, he reappeared. Under Vicky's calm gaze, he spoke tenderly and affectionately. "Vicky, you're finally awake. I've been waiting for you all this time. Ding." Story Shots reminds you to click the subscribe button at the bottom right corner to read the full novel. I stared at Vicky Granger, lying unconscious in the ICU, her body riddled with tubes. A bitter sense of schadenfreude welled up inside me, impossible to suppress. You see, this is the karma for betraying true love. The doctor said her brain injury was severe, with less than a 5% chance of waking up. When her senior, Calvin Evans, heard the news, he came to the hospital, gave her a disdainful glance, and coldly said, "Hope you recover soon." He never came back after that. He probably forgot that Vicky had the accident because of him. 6 months ago, the day before Vicky was to divorce me, Calvin called to say he was drunk at a party and couldn't get home. Vicky, disregarding the terrible weather with its pouring rain and howling wind, drove out to pick him up, ultimately ending up in a multi-car pileup. When I got the call and rushed to the hospital, I was faced with one critical condition notice after another. No one could understand how I felt at that moment, darkly hoping she would just die, while also viciously thinking that dying would be too easy for her. I didn't know what outcome I wanted. I just wished that all the pain I had endured, she would have to experience too. But now, she lay in a coma in the hospital, reduced to a vegetative state. And Calvin Evans, the man she loved most, had abandoned her. Actually, when I once ran into Calvin at a restaurant, I kindly reminded him. The doctor said if someone important to her spent time with her, talked to her often, it might increase her chances of waking up. He smiled noncommittally and said, "What's that got to do with me? Why should I waste the best years of my life on a vegetable who means nothing to me? Lester, you're her husband. You're the one who should be with her. Means nothing." I silently repeated those words, finding them incredibly ironic. He didn't say she meant nothing when he made Vicky abandon me with a 40-degree fever to attend his birthday party. He didn't say she meant nothing when he wanted Vicky to divorce me and be with him. But now that Vicky was in a vegetative state because of an accident she had while going to pick him up, now that she needed his company and care, suddenly she meant nothing. I looked at him calmly and said, "Calvin, don't forget. She ended up like this because she was going to pick you up when you were drunk at that party." Hearing this, he became angry and defensive, shouting, "Did I hold a gun to her head and force her to come get me? It was her own choice, her own silly infatuation that made her come. It's just bad luck she had an accident and ended up a half-dead vegetable. Don't try to pin this on me." I said nothing more, just silently watched as he hurried away, as if trying to escape some ill fortune. He was right, of course. Calvin Evans wouldn't want to wait for someone who might never wake up. I tilted my head slightly, my gaze seeming to inadvertently pass over the soul that had been following me for so long. The look of disbelief, the tightly furrowed brow. She must be feeling quite awful now. Vicky didn't know I could see her. It was the second week after the car accident. I had fallen asleep while working in my study when a gust of night wind from the open window startled me awake. In my hazy vision, I saw Vicky leaning against the wooden bookshelf filled with books, her expression sorrowful. The white curtains occasionally brushed gently across her form. My drowsiness instantly vanished. I even forgot to react, maintaining my position of lying on the desk with half-open eyes for a long while before I called the hospital. The news I received was, "Mrs. Granger is stable today. Her condition hasn't worsened, but there are no signs of her waking up either." After calmly hanging up the phone, I blinked and realized her entire body was slightly transparent. So I stood up, stepping on the soft carpet, and slowly walked to her. Pretending not to see anything, I reached through her body to take The History of Venture Capital from the second shelf. in the few short steps it took to walk back to my chair with the book. My emotions underwent a drastic change from terror to surprise to calmness. Vicky's soul had separated from her body and was trapped by my side. Not only that, but I could also hear her voice. Because when I picked up the divorce agreement she had her lawyer draft, I heard her sneer, "Lester, you must be very happy now, aren't you? I'm in a coma and can't divorce you. It's just as you wished." She said it was as I wished. She thought my persistence in holding on until agreeing to divorce was unwillingness and reluctance. But the truth was I had really decided to let her go. Was I happy? No. I wanted to make her unhappy too. So I let her hear with her own ears how Calvin Evans distanced himself from her. The soft footsteps of a nurse echoed from the end of the corridor as I silently walked into the ICU and to her bedside. I had to admit, even wearing just a hospital gown with messy, limp hair and a pale, sickly complexion as she lay in bed, Vicky was still very beautiful. Her thick, curled lashes cast a shadow under her eyelids, her delicate nose above perfectly full lips, and her oval face, though thinner due to the coma, still embodied both innocence and sensuality. But my feelings for Vicky, my reason for being with her, were never because of her face. After all, I understood the principle that the more beautiful something is, the more dangerous it can be. So when we first met at the same wedding, serving as best man and bridesmaid respectively, I immediately classified her in the category of dangerous items. Apart from politely handing her a tissue when she got splashed with wine, I didn't have much interaction with her. But when fate intervenes, there's no stopping it. Soon we met for the second time. It happened when I was jogging in the park one evening and by chance saved an elderly woman who had fainted, Vicky's grandmother. Starting from when Vicky took me out for a meal to express her gratitude, our meetings became frequent. Trapped in the internship building during a rainstorm, I'd coincidentally meet Vicky passing by, and she'd give me a lift home. At a friend's event I was dragged to during the holidays, it turned out to be Vicky's birthday party. Facing the lit candles, she wished for good fortune in love. As the coincidences piled up, I sensed something was amiss, so I began to deliberately avoid her. But Vicky not only didn't mind my aloofness, she became even more persistent, until I had nowhere to retreat and helplessly asked her what she wanted. Only then did she look at me with smiling eyes and ask in a gentle tone, "Lester, I'm pursuing you. Can't you tell?" I never understood why Vicky Granger would fancy me. But after that, she stopped hiding it and launched a full-on charm offensive. I tried to resist her advances, desperately guarding my heart. But Vicky at that time was beautiful, mature, witty, and funny, not to mention attentive and gentle in a way that was solely focused on me. To be honest, for someone like me who had never dated a girl before, it was nearly impossible to remain unmoved. Falling for her was only a matter of time. The turning point that led me to agree to be with her was on Valentine's Day. I had drunk quite a lot at a business dinner to secure a contract. As I was leaving, I accidentally ran into a family dining in the next room. My father, his mistress, and their love child. At first, I didn't pay them any attention, intending to pretend I hadn't seen them. But the illegitimate son just had to call out loudly, "Brother, aren't you going to greet Dad when you see him?" Then his mother chimed in, "That's right, Lester. Your father misses you very much. Why don't you join us for dinner?" I paused in my steps, turned back to look at the family of three who had driven my mother to her death, and sneered, "Oh, you can still eat? Aren't you afraid my mum's restless spirit will come haunting you tonight?" Probably stung by my words, he immediately stood up and pointed at me. "You ungrateful! Shut up! I don't have a father like you." Before I could finish, the woman next to him picked up a glass of wine and threw it in my face. The next second, a figure appeared behind me and threw a glass of wine at her in return. It was Vicky who had suddenly shown up. She stood in front of me, smirking as she tossed out a line, "Enjoy your meal, murderers." Then she grabbed my hand and pulled me out of the restaurant. In the flickering lights of the night, Vicky carefully wiped the wine off my face with a tissue, not mentioning the unpleasant incident that had just occurred. To be honest, This was the first time in many years that someone had stood in front of me in a protective stance. Couples passed by on the street, and I don't know how long we stood there before the silence was broken. Vicky's tone was as casual as if she were asking me if I wanted to grab a bite. As she said, "Lester Bailey, would you like to spend Valentine's Day together?" Even now, I can still recall the trembling of that seedling breaking through the soil in my heart. I looked into her earnest eyes and decided to follow my heart. It would be her. So I looked at her with a smile in my eyes and said, "I'd love to." She was stunned for a second, then suddenly smiled and took out a chocolate from her bag. She unwrapped it and put it in my mouth, looking at me expectantly. "I made these myself. Is it sweet?" I smiled. "Very sweet. It will always be this sweet." I was too naive and foolish then, thinking that always meant forever, until Calvin Evans returned to the country. Only then did I realize that the expiry date of always was before his appearance. After Calvin Evans showed up, all promises and vows became a joke. I had once scrolled through countless answers online about how powerful the impact of a first love can be, but the myriad detailed descriptions in those answers were no match for a single glance Vicky gave Calvin. It's a cliché story. Calvin Evans was Vicky's unattainable first love. After he chose to be with another woman and went abroad, Vicky never stopped pining for him. And I was nothing but a pawn in her life's journey. Vicky only had one relative, her grandmother. She had collapsed earlier due to stomach cancer, and the only thing she was concerned about in this life was Vicky, so she hoped to see Vicky get married. I was just the tool Vicky chose to put her grandmother's mind at ease. But Vicky's grandmother really did like me and was very kind to me. The love I felt from Vicky was an illusion, but the affection her grandmother gave me was genuine. She would make my favorite treacle tart, prepare clothes for me for all 4 seasons in advance, and take my side when Vicky and I had disagreements. She would then turn to Vicky with a stern face and ask, "What could Lester have done wrong? He does everything for you." Even on her deathbed, she said to me, "Marrying this girl has been hard on you, Lester. As long as you two are happy together, I can rest easy." At that moment, Vicky, with tears in her eyes, held my hand tightly and promised, "We will be, I promise." Then, just 8 months after her grandmother's passing, at a gathering, she reunited with Calvin Evans, who had returned to the UK after their breakup. I noticed something was off because of a small incident. One evening while we were having dinner, I mentioned that after a sudden downpour earlier that day, a double rainbow had appeared in the sky. Everyone on Facebook was posting photos they'd captured, saying that a double rainbow was a sign of good fortune to come. After telling her this, I asked if she had seen it. She didn't answer because she was lost in thought. A few seconds later, she realized I had stopped eating and was quietly looking at her. She smiled gently and asked, "Lester, what were you saying just now?" I said it wasn't important. Back in school, whenever I encountered multiple choice questions I wasn't sure about, I could always guess the correct answer based on intuition. I never imagined that one day, this skill I had once been so proud of would be used on Vicky. Almost uncontrollably, I guessed that during those few seconds when Vicky was lost in thought, it was because of a man. And I wasn't wrong. It was Calvin Evans. He was 3 years ahead of Vicky at university. Back then, Vicky wasn't as mature and beautiful as she later became. She was just an ordinary university student who couldn't compete with the wealthy and beautiful girl who also liked Calvin. So, unsurprisingly, she lost. But she probably never expected that one day Calvin would return to the UK after a breakup, and by then she would have successfully transformed herself. It seemed as if everything was just right, as if their past separation was only so they could reunite at the best possible time. I don't know how much Vicky loved Calvin that she allowed him to successfully call her away from me time and time again, completely disregarding her status as a married woman. His casual remark about wanting to be with Vicky was enough to destroy my marriage, to destroy me. From initial suspicion to later confrontation, and finally to pleading and hysteria, Vicky pushed me away in disgust. "Lester, you're truly repulsive right now." That night, I stood on the balcony all night, my tears wetting one cigarette but after another, realizing one thing. Vicky was right. I found myself repulsive too, so I gave up. When Vicky brought up divorce again, I asked her, "In these 4 years together, was there ever a moment when you were sincere?" She impatiently avoided my gaze and said no. I lowered my head, silent for a few seconds, then calmly agreed to the divorce. She seemed somewhat surprised and cautiously asked, "What's your trick this time?" Indeed, several times before I had used excuses like suddenly falling ill or the car breaking down to constantly delay the deadline. The only time I was truly willing to divorce her, she ended up in a coma after getting into a car accident because of Calvin. Then I discovered that Calvin had not only abandoned her without hesitation but had also gotten back together with his ex. It was said that the reason Calvin Evans broke up and returned to England was because his rich and beautiful girlfriend had an ambiguous relationship with her first love. They had many arguments about this, which eventually led to their split. But as the saying goes, you always want what you can't have, and regret what you've lost. So when Calvin returned to England and got in touch with Vicky Granger, appearing at the same events time and again, gradually getting closer to her, his ex-girlfriend also came back to find him. It's hard to say if there was any possibility that Calvin's interactions with Vicky were partly intended to provoke his ex. After all, Vicky used to be her rival. During the time Vicky was planning to divorce me for Calvin, his ex was also at her most frantic in trying to win him back, doing many romantic yet extreme things, apologies via drone, proposing with a sea of flowers, self-harm after drinking. Calvin watched it all silently, continuing to be with Vicky, and then shortly after her car accident and coma, when his ex once again spent a fortune on a big screen apology and confession, he agreed to get back together. No one knows what role Vicky played between them, but his ex did visit Vicky in the hospital once and said with relief, "Although it may not be right to think this way, I'm very grateful for that night's accident, Vicky. I've won again this time." Vicky was right behind her at the time, staring at her with a gloomy expression, but unable to do anything due to her ghostly state. From hearing Calvin distance himself from her to witnessing him reconcile with his ex, Vicky was initially in disbelief, then became furious, and finally had to resignedly accept it all. I calmly and gleefully savored every bit of her pain, watching her start to quietly follow behind me, finding it quite ironic. She had once been so eager to cut ties with me, so unwilling to see me again, yet in the end, she was forced to be with me every day. Just like when we first started dating, we shared everything we did each day without reservation, letting each other know our whereabouts. Now, she had to follow me to work every day, to gatherings, shopping, and even planning where to travel. As time went on, I began to hear her resentful and dissatisfied voice. "I'm in a coma, and you still have the heart to go traveling? Do you have any heart at all? Don't you care about whether I live or die? Lester, have you forgotten you're married because I've been lying here too long? Stay away from that woman." The woman she referred to was an intern I was mentoring, called Rosie Roberts. Among all the interns I've mentored, she was the only one who wouldn't properly call me Mr. Bailey, but directly called me Lester by my first name. She was also the most outstanding in terms of ability among them all. I actually didn't care how they addressed me, and besides, Rosie's voice was crisp and clean. Calling Lester didn't feel offensive at all. But Vicky didn't see it that way. Whenever Rosie appeared by my side, she would show a side of her I had never seen before, yelling in exasperation, "Lester, are you blind? Can't you see her intentions aren't pure?" Hearing this, I would look up at Rosie, who was clean, bright, obedient, and polite, sitting quietly to the side working, and I really didn't understand. "Vicky, what are you so anxious about?" Of course, I'm no longer a naive young man, and I'm certainly not blind. It's impossible for me not to notice what Rosie Roberts is thinking. She likes me. Rosie has the kind of lively and cute appearance that's very popular with boys these days. Her personality is such that she can be playful when needed, but also calmer than anyone else when the situation calls for it. Since I've known her, I've rarely seen her lose control of her emotions. Even when a colleague accidentally deleted the proposal she had worked so hard on, she could calmly finish her breakfast before coolly choosing the quickest method to recover it or simply recreate it from scratch. After solving the problem, she would say to her apologetic and worried colleague, "It's all sorted now. Just be a bit more careful next time. Okay?" The only time I saw a panicked expression on her face was when we went to discuss a collaborative project together. After it ended, she went to get the car while I rested in the meeting room for a bit due to a headache from drinking before heading out to find her. On the way, I encountered a drunk man who, despite being the one who bumped into me, tried to pick a fight and unreasonably demanded that I apologize. To be honest, if this had happened right after I graduated, I would have been scared stiff and carefully apologized. But I'm not that person anymore, so I ignored him and turned to leave. Then, at the moment he angrily tried to smash his bottle over my head, I firmly gripped his wrist and restrained him. The bottle, smashed on the ground with too much force, exploded with a loud bang. When Rosie found me, her usually neat and tidy dress was unusually smudged with dirt, but she hadn't even noticed. She just looked at my hand, which was bleeding from cuts caused by the shattered glass, and apologized to me with ragged breaths. "I'm sorry, I was too late." I gave her a slight smile. "Not late at all. Your timing was perfect." Later, after she bought some medicine and bandaged my wound, she drove me home. Looking out the window, I spoke in a casual tone. "Rosie, I'm already married." She showed no sign of surprise and replied nonchalantly while keeping her eyes on the road. "Yes, I know. But I heard you're getting divorced." These two exchanges were the only time we had ever discussed personal matters since we met. Everything said was factual, and there was nothing inappropriate about it. So Vicky Granger's anger puzzled me. I hadn't done anything, and she clearly didn't love me, so why was she angry? But it didn't matter because none of her emotions, including her as a person, would affect me anymore. I continued to maintain a normal working relationship with Rosie. Until today, when we went to check the setup of the event venue, and a scaffolding suddenly collapsed. Rosie reacted quickly, pushing me out of the way and taking the brunt of the impact herself. I was fine with only a slight scrape on my arm. Rosie, however, had injuries of varying degrees to her side and lower leg. I followed the ambulance to the hospital, anxiously waiting for her test results. Just as I heard the doctor say she was fine and only needed to rest at home, I received a call from Vicky's attending physician. It was then that I suddenly realized Vicky, who had been frantically calling out Lester behind me when Rosie and I fell, had disappeared. At the same time, the doctor's voice came through the phone. "We just examined Miss Granger and found that her condition is improving. There are signs that she might wake up soon." I stood there for a while after hanging up the phone, then went to the ICU and stood in front of the still sleeping Vicky. I smiled sarcastically. "Less than a 5% chance. And you still managed to wake up?" I didn't know if Vicky Granger would ever wake up, but half a month after I left the hospital, I heard another piece of news. Calvin Evans had broken up again. Long ago, I once saw a comment, "Cheating happens either 0 times or countless times." So, it wasn't surprising that his wealthy girlfriend broke up with him shortly after they had reconciled, as she was entangled with some unknown social media influencer. What truly shocked me was that Calvin Evans, abandoning his former image of leaving gracefully and being a cool, aloof heartthrob, was now in a vast shopping center, cursing loudly and begging pitifully, without any regard for his public image. I watched that scene from afar, feeling a sense of familiarity. That was who I used to be. Back then, when I desperately clung to Vicky, unwilling to let go, I was just like that, a madman who had lost his mind. The most memorable incident was on my birthday when I encountered her at a cafe, chatting happily with Calvin Evans, despite her saying she had a business trip. At that moment, I felt as if I had been doused with a bucket of ice water from head to toe, yet my heart felt like it was being seared on a blazing fire. Without thinking, I rushed over and swept everything off their table. Vicky immediately stood up and angrily questioned me. Lester, have you gone mad? Calvin smiled elegantly and looked at Vicky. How did you end up marrying a man like this, Vicky? My rationality completely shattered. I raised my hand and punched him. Should she marry a homewrecker like you instead? Then Vicky, without hesitation, slapped me across the face. The taste of blood immediately spread in my mouth. That night, she mentioned divorce to me for the first time. Lester, let's get a divorce. I once truly, deeply loved Vicky. So even though my rational mind told me to let go, emotionally I couldn't accept it, couldn't bear to, and didn't want them to be happy together. In the end, I only hurt myself badly. Now Calvin Evans was tasting the bitterness I had experienced back then. As for why he could leave so easily after his last breakup, but made such a drastically different choice this time, I couldn't help but suspect it was because his backup plan, his confidence, his tool for stimulating his wealthy girlfriend Vicky, was in a coma. As the drama continued, I was about to look away while stirring my coffee when I inadvertently glimpsed a faint figure in the corner of the crowd, calmly watching the frenzied Calvin Evans. It was Vicky. After many days, her soul had appeared again. This time, however, she was no longer trapped by my side, but she also couldn't come near me anymore. A distance of 3 meters, that was the closest she could get to me. I thought she wouldn't follow me anymore after gaining her freedom, but I didn't expect that after that. Every morning when I left for work, I would see her standing quietly under a ginkgo tree near the entrance of the estate. The moment she saw me, she would instinctively walk towards me, only to be pulled back to her original spot by some unseen force. Every time she would walk towards me, every time she would be pulled back. I didn't know if wandering in this world like a lost soul, she would also have moments when she hoped someone could see her. But one evening, as I came out of a pastry shop, I smiled and looked in her direction. After a brief pause, she seemed excited and moved her lips, probably mouthing Lester. Then, I walked forward step by step, carrying an exquisitely packaged small cake, watching her being forced to step back, until I stopped at her previous position. She saw Rosie Roberts walking towards me, passing right through her body. Since that unfortunate incident, Rosie Roberts had been recuperating at home. During this time, I visited her once, bringing flowers and fruit. I also covered all her medical expenses and the cost of hiring a caregiver. She didn't refuse my help, but when I asked if she needed anything else, she looked into my eyes and said, "In a month, it's my birthday." Now that she has recovered, and it happens to be her birthday, I've arrived with a cake to fulfill my promise, to celebrate her birthday with her. As I walked with Rosie towards where I had parked, Vicky Granger seemed to realize what we were about to do. Through the crowd of people coming and going, she shouted at me, "Lester Bailey, don't you dare go. Come back, Lester. Come back." Without hesitation, I got into the car. Watching Vicky's enraged expression in the rearview mirror, I felt a bit dazed, remembering a small incident. Shortly after Vicky and I got together, I switched jobs to another company. One evening when I needed to work overtime, I told Vicky not to wait for me for dinner. After work, I was about to grab a late-night snack with my colleagues, but just as I got into the car, Vicky called. Over the phone, her voice carried a faint smile, both resigned and gentle. "Mr. Bailey, I've been waiting for you downstairs for 3 hours. Are you really going to abandon me like this?" Startled, I saw Vicky's figure in the rearview mirror, holding a packed dinner. I immediately got out of the car and ran to her, pulling her into my arms, asking, "Why didn't you call me? Why wait here alone?" She nuzzled my chest affectionately and said with a smile, "Of course, I didn't want to disturb my dear boyfriend while he was working." Snapping back to the present, Vicky's fading figure in the rearview mirror grew smaller and smaller until it became just a speck. I heard Rosie ask me, "What are you looking at?" I jokingly replied, "Just watching a farce unfold." 15 minutes later, we arrived at the pre-booked restaurant. Although it was her birthday celebration, Rosie ordered food according to my taste. I discreetly shifted my gaze to the cake, opening the box, which immediately released a sweet orange scent. After lighting the candles, I held up the cake, smiling as I congratulated her. "Happy birthday, Rosie. Make a wish." The restaurant's unique lighting was soft and dim. Through the flickering candlelight, I couldn't quite make out her features, but I knew she was looking at me intently before closing her eyes to make a wish. "I hope I won't be late again." I couldn't help but chuckle, putting down the cake and raising my glass to her. "Then I wish for your wish to come true." Later, slightly tipsy from the wine, we strolled along the riverside path. The river reflected the brilliant lights, and I gazed at it quietly for a while before sighing, broaching a personal matter with Rosie for the second time. I candidly told her, "Rosie, although I'm going to get divorced, you know that she's in a coma after the car accident." The night breeze gently swayed the fringe on her forehead. She seemed utterly unconcerned by the implications of my words, casually resting her forearm on the railing by the shore. She turned her head to look at me and said bluntly, "Divorce or widowhood, there will be an outcome eventually." It was just as these words fell that I was shocked to spot Vicky's figure not far away. I don't know if the evening breeze had carried those words to her ears. From the corner of my eye, I saw her silently gazing at me. Then, as if mocking herself, she gave a light chuckle before her figure slowly dissipated into the wind. 3 days later, I got that outcome. Vicky woke up. Calvin Evans arrived at the hospital before I did. In the quiet, cold hospital room, he was speaking softly to Vicky Granger under her calm gaze. "I've been waiting for you, Vicky. You're finally awake." I didn't know how he found out Vicky had woken up, nor was I interested in his heartfelt confession. My eyes swept over Vicky's, which had been fixed on me since I appeared. I turned to ask the doctor standing nearby, "When can she be discharged?" The doctor explained cautiously, "Miss Granger has just woken up. She needs to stay in hospital for observation and rehabilitation. If there's anything urgent." I smiled politely. "Nothing urgent. Just need to get a divorce." As soon as I finished speaking, I heard a crash. Vicky had knocked the water glass out of Calvin's hand. Under his incredulous gaze, she stared at me intently, her eyes red with anger. "Lester Bailey, I've just woken up and you can't even ask how I am before rushing to divorce me?" You see, she's always been good at twisting facts. She was the one who used every means to force me into a divorce, and now she's blaming me for wanting one. Before I could speak, I heard Calvin call out in a very soft voice, filled with confused bewilderment, "Vicky!" The room fell silent for a moment. I calmly looked at the shattered glass on the floor, ignoring Vicky's furious gaze, and turned to leave, dropping only one sentence. "Let me know when you're discharged so we can finalize the divorce." After that, I never went to the hospital again. I heard that Calvin went every day, but I didn't know or care what he did there. The worst part was that every 2 or 3 days, I'd receive a call from the hospital, invariably to inform me about Vicky's recovery progress. I wasn't sure if these updates were really necessary to report to family members, but I didn't want to know. So when they called again, I politely declined. "She's an adult. You don't need to tell me everything unless she's dead. Don't call me again." Just before I hung up, I heard the sound of glass shattering on the floor and Calvin's startled cry. I saw Vicky again 2 months later in the evening. She had been discharged. Since my car was being washed, Rosie Roberts, who had been working late with me, dropped me off at the entrance to my apartment complex. Just as I watched her car drive away, I heard an angry voice behind me. "Lester Bailey." The smile froze on my lips as I turned to look. It was Vicky. Her face was pale and she had lost a lot of weight. Her thin coat billowed in the night wind, and the streetlight cast a long shadow behind her. I stood still, watching her walk towards me briskly, then coldly demand, "Where have you two been at this hour?" I couldn't be bothered to deal with her. Frowning, I turned aside. "Unless it's about the divorce, I don't think we have anything to discuss." I had barely taken 2 steps when she blocked my path. Vicky glared at me fiercely, gritting out each word. "Lester, don't forget, we're not divorced yet." I immediately understood her meaning and found it utterly ridiculous. I couldn't help but chuckle, then leaned in to ask her gently, Vicky, that marriage certificate never constrained you before. What makes you think it can constrain me now? Calvin Evans approached me a month after Vicky Granger was discharged from the hospital. Since Vicky regained consciousness, her attitude towards Calvin had taken a complete 180-degree turn. It was so obvious that even the nurses at the hospital could sense Vicky's coldness towards Calvin. After being discharged, Vicky used the poor excuse of needing to deal with work to refuse meeting him, and then she started appearing outside my company building and at the entrance of my residential complex every day, because she no longer wanted a divorce. So the first thing Calvin said when he found me was, Lester, you did this on purpose, didn't you? You deliberately got involved with another woman to provoke Vicky, to make her want you back. I had just come out of a restaurant at the time. His words amused me, with one hand holding a coffee and the other casually inserted into my trouser pocket. I looked down at him and calmly replied, Yes, that's exactly what you think. Lester, you. I had no interest in listening to his unreasonable accusations. After taking a few big steps around him to enter the company building, I turned to see him stubbornly trying to follow me in, only to be stopped by security. Faced with the guard's hesitant inquiry, Mr. Bailey, is he? I smiled and said, Just an intruder. After that, I never saw Calvin again. However, I heard that after Vicky repeatedly gave him the cold shoulder, Calvin finally lost his patience and told her indifferently, Vicky, you'd better not regret this. I won't give you another chance. Soon after, he got together with the daughter of a deputy CEO who had taken a liking to him at their company. Clearly, Calvin's harsh words had no effect on Vicky whatsoever, because she continued to find reasons to see me as before, insisting, Lester, I won't get a divorce. I found it both ironic and laughable. When she was trying every possible way to force me into a divorce, she probably never imagined that one day our roles would be reversed, and she would be the one saying these words. I even heard her speak to me softly and tenderly after a long time. Lester, can we start over? She said start over. She wanted me to pretend that Calvin had never appeared, that she had never hurt me, that nothing had ever happened, and then to be with her again without any grudges, loving her like before. I felt somewhat helpless and even more puzzled. In the end, I only gave her one sentence in return. How could I ever marry someone like you, Vicky? This sentence must have hit a sore spot for her. She immediately became angry and shouted, Who else do you want to marry then? That in turn. Then she asked me, Lester, haven't you had enough of this nonsense? Right, when she wanted a divorce, it was to pursue true love. But when I wanted a divorce, it was just me being unreasonable. Actually, since I had given up on her, I hadn't been angry for a long time. My career was going well, I had friends by my side, and life was comfortable. There seemed to be nothing worth getting upset about anymore. Until this moment, when my emotions were stirred up again. Words were no longer enough to vent my anger, so I raised my hand without hesitation and slapped her hard across the face. After the loud slap, there was complete silence. Vicky's face was turned to the side from the force of the slap. She maintained that position for a long while, then finally let out a light chuckle. I've paid you back for that slap now. Are you satisfied? I know you let her get close to you just to get back at me. Lester, you've achieved your goal. I won't deny that I did have some feelings for Rosie Roberts. The reason was quite simple. Once I was troubled by a tricky project for a long time. In the evening, I sat alone on a bench in the square, lost in thought. Around me, I could hear laughter and chatter. Colorful balloons and bubbles floated by, but none of it mattered to me. It was in that scene that a person in a teddy bear costume, holding a balloon, walked through the crowd to my side and tied the balloon to my wrist. Then they performed a little bunny hop dance for me. To be honest, it wasn't very well executed, but it still made me laugh. I leaned back slightly and looked at her teasingly, dancing like a rabbit while wearing a bear costume. Rosie, you're something else. She stepped closer, took off her headpiece, revealing a flushed face with sweat-dampened hair at the temples. Her eyes were clear and bright, fixed on my face as she said, "It doesn't matter what I'm wearing or what dance I'm doing. What matters is that you're smiling, Lester." Indeed, I was smiling. So the reason was that simple: she made me happy. Later, I squinted at her for a moment and asked, "The teddy bear that appeared in front of me last time was you too, wasn't it?" It was on the night when Vicky and I had our first argument because of Calvin. I was sitting by the window in a cafe, feeling gloomy, when a person in a teddy bear costume came up to me and performed a magic trick through the glass. At that time, Rosie hadn't joined the company yet, and I didn't know who was under that costume. I only remember that after I silently mouthed "thank you" to her, she looked at me quietly for a few seconds, then slowly turned and walked into the crowd. Not long after that, I heard her introduce herself in front of the interns at the company. "Hello, I'm Rosie Roberts." Unlike the previous time, this time Rosie had taken off her headpiece and stood in front of me. After looking at me for a while, she said softly, "Do you remember me?" I tugged at the balloon on my wrist and blinked. Of course I remember you. Compared to the intense feelings Vicky brought me, like strong liquor, Rosie's affection was like a refreshing glass of lemonade. Not particularly exciting, but it wouldn't make one lose themselves either. It was calm and warm. Moreover, I wouldn't give up on love because of one failed relationship. That would make those brief 4 years with Vicky seem far too important in the grand scheme of my life. So I didn't resist my feelings for Rosie. After all, love itself isn't wrong. It's people who make mistakes. Vicky was just a mistake I encountered on my life's journey. Once I let go, it was over. Everything afterwards had nothing to do with her. I certainly wouldn't use a genuine relationship to seek revenge on her. Therefore, in response to Vicky's rather confident questioning, I just shook my head slightly and looked at her mockingly. "You think too highly of yourself, Vicky." Her face paled the moment I finished speaking. She opened her mouth, her voice trembling slightly and a bit hoarse. "Lester, I know it was all my fault before. I was too obsessed and hurt you. But now I've realized my mistake. I understand that you're the one I truly love. So I won't divorce Calvin." Faced with her obstinate behavior, I smiled faintly, unconcerned. "If that's the case, Vicky, then you can experience what it's like to have the person you love thinking of another woman day and night." The knife she had once thrust into my heart had finally turned back on her. Vicky Granger told me that I was the one she truly loved. To be honest, when I heard those words, I felt nothing inside. I even wanted to laugh a little. If I had to pay the price of being deeply hurt just for her to figure out who she truly loved, then that love was an insult to me. Moreover, this realization only came after Calvin Evans had deceived and abandoned her, causing her to feel regret. After that, Vicky continued to pursue me for a long time. I didn't deliberately avoid her, nor did I angrily tell her to leave me alone. In the late hours outside the office building, at the entrance of the rain-soaked estate, she would stand and wait if she wanted to. After all, apart from this desperate clinging, she had no other way to be part of my life, even though we were still legally married. When she approached me again, she asked me this question: "Lester, you didn't really love me that much either, did you?" I didn't know what kind of emotion prompted her to say those words. I looked down carefully at her eyes and asked, "Vicky, do you remember that summer 2 years after we got married? On that summer evening, with the sound of cicadas in the air, we were eating at an outdoor barbecue restaurant when we encountered a group of drunk troublemakers. In the chaos, I shielded Vicky from a broken bottle that was thrust towards her. My thin shirt was instantly torn, and the blood from the wound on my side stained a large part of Vicky's white dress. When I woke up in the hospital room, I immediately saw Vicky sitting by my bed, disheveled with red-rimmed eyes. She held my hand and said in a hoarse voice, "Lester, please don't do this anymore, okay? I really can't bear to see you get hurt." I smiled weakly at her then. "Don't worry, it doesn't hurt that much." Indeed, it wasn't very painful, especially compared to the hurt she would inflict on me later. We reminisced in silence, neither of us speaking. I could hear her trembling breaths. Finally, I sighed resignedly. Vicky, for years ago, you were unrivaled in my heart. After a long pause, she seemed to speak with difficulty, her voice hoarse and dry. And now? Am I no longer able to compete with her in your heart now? I looked at her seriously and shook my head. No, Vicky. Now you're not in my heart at all. Perhaps we had finally reached the end of the road. She gave a bleak smile and tried to appeal to our family ties. But Lester, you promised Gran that you would stay with me. I remained silent, feeling somewhat weary. Without saying anything, I simply opened my phone and showed her a photo of a letter Gran had left for me. The gist of it was that if Vicky ever did anything excessive, I shouldn't hesitate to leave her and not look back. I had thought this letter would never be needed, but it turned out to be useful twice. The first time, I didn't heed the advice promptly and lingered for a long time. The second time is now. Outside, it had started drizzling at some point. The gloomy twilight was descending. Vicky's eyes were red-rimmed. In the end, she said nothing and turned to leave. Her steps were hurried. Her retreating figure looked disheveled. Long ago, I had imagined that if Vicky Granger ever forced me into a divorce, I would look at her, all prim and proper, with pain and hatred in my eyes, and say, "Vicky, I will never forgive you for this." Now that the day has actually arrived, I find my emotions surprisingly calm. When we met at the court, Vicky looked more haggard than before. I heard that after getting caught in a heavy downpour the other day, she went home with a high fever and had to be rushed to the hospital by ambulance. It seems that car accident really did take a toll on her health. A friend couldn't contain their laughter when they told me over the phone. Looks like the after effects of the accident are kicking in. Who knows how long she'll last? Cheating during marriage and betraying true love. She's getting what she deserves. I hired the best divorce lawyer and submitted all the evidence of Vicky's infidelity. So when it came to dividing the assets, I didn't give up a single penny that was rightfully mine. Vicky remained silent throughout the proceedings. Just before we parted ways, she suddenly spoke, as if asking me, or perhaps talking to herself, if Calvin Evans hadn't come back then, we could have spent our lives together, couldn't we? If Calvin hadn't returned, perhaps her deception would never have been uncovered. But she would have always pined for her unattainable love, and as time passed, his image in her heart would only have grown more beautiful. Eventually, even the slightest disagreement between us would have led her to constantly reminisce about Calvin, and I would have become the object of her contempt, silently compared to her ideal. I looked up at the cloudless sky and smiled slightly. Vicky, I wouldn't have been caught in this three-way entanglement if it weren't for you. You dragged me into it for your own selfish reasons. Life after the divorce hasn't changed much. I go to work, socialize, and occasionally take a few days off to travel when I finish a project. Except for one thing, Rosie Roberts and I are now in a relationship. It happened 3 months after my divorce. At a friend's birthday party, I was getting some air on the terrace when a business partner approached me with a glass of wine. She politely and elegantly inquired, "Remember that old film we talked about during our last collaboration? I've recently found the original soundtrack CD. Would you be interested, Mr. Bailey?" As adults, the implication was clear. I was about to respond with a slight smile when a crisp voice came from behind her. "I'm sorry, but I was here first." It was Rosie. She stood there in a stunning mermaid dress, her long black hair cascading down her back, gazing at me intently, both graceful and radiant. The evening breeze carried the scent of unknown flowers. I broke the silence first, glancing pointedly at the wine glass in my business partner's hand before speaking directly. "I'm sorry, but I prefer lemon water." The rejection was clear, and soon only Rosie and I remained on the terrace. I stood quietly for a moment, then lowered my head slightly and asked her with a composed smile, "So, Rosie, what film shall we go see?" She looked up at me, her eyes sparkling, and replied with utmost sincerity, "Let's go see Love Actually." The interactions between Rosie Roberts and me weren't filled with grand, memorable moments, but every recollection was imbued with warmth and tenderness. The warm milk she brought me in the mornings, the hangover tea she brewed after a night out, the freshly ironed shirts, the perfectly knotted ties, and my favorite pork ribs on the dinner table every evening. Sometimes, I'd catch her reflection in the mirror as she carefully dried my hair, and I'd be reminded of the first time I noticed her interest in me. It was probably in that same lift, her gaze lingering on me through the mirrored walls as she stood behind me. A look that was not entirely innocent. Rosie's emotional maturity, independence, and exceptional capabilities were evident. In our relationship, her contributions were visibly greater than mine. I felt as though all I could offer her was companionship. Occasionally, I'd ask if she felt the arrangement was unfair. She'd calmly shake her head, embrace me with a sigh, her voice tinged with an inexplicable sadness. "I just feel like you might leave at any moment." To be honest, I'd been betrayed before, so even though I had feelings for her, I always kept one foot out the door, never giving my whole heart. After a moment of silence, I could only say, "I'm sorry I haven't been able to show you my complete devotion. That's my fault." Hearing this, she seemed to find some solace and smiled, her tone serious. "Then I'll love you a bit more, to make our love whole. I don't know how far Rosie and I will go, but being with her makes me content and happy, so I'll make the most of each day. We'll stay together if it works, and part ways if it doesn't. As long as I'm comfortable." That's the lesson I learned from my failed relationship with Vicky Granger. I saw Vicky again 2 years after our divorce. At a welcome home party for a friend, I was blocked in the corridor on my way back from the loo to our private room. A crowd had gathered, blocking the passage. I stepped back, intending to see what the commotion was about, when I spotted Vicky similarly trapped at the other end of the crowd. She was quietly gazing at me. Averting my gaze nonchalantly, I looked up to see what the fuss was about and froze when I recognized one of the main participants in the drama. It was Calvin Evans. Sometimes one can't help but marvel at the peculiarities of fate. It had brought the three of us together once before in a tangle of infidelity, and now here we were, colliding again under similar circumstances. Calvin had married that executive's daughter shortly after getting together with her. Unfortunately, in their second year of marriage, she had an affair. For a moment, I wasn't sure whether to sympathize with his repeated experience of being cheated on or to feel a sense of karmic justice for what he'd done. But I hoped that in every painful moment, he'd remember that someone else had once suffered the same torment because of him. Later, as the crowd dispersed and Vicky and I passed each other, she suddenly called out my name, then said in a hoarse voice, "I'm sorry." I stopped and looked at her, unable to discern her expression. It seemed a mix of sadness, guilt, and barely contained grief. I had no interest in deciphering it and replied in a gentle tone, "I won't forgive you, and I hope you're not doing well." She indeed wasn't doing well. Reportedly, due to complications from a car accident, she'd been seeking treatment abroad for years, ultimately in vain. Both her physical and mental health were deteriorating. Hearing this, she stumbled slightly. As Rosie called out to me from a distance and began walking towards us, Vicky quickly turned away. Oddly, I felt her silhouette seemed hunched, trembling slightly, yet without a sound. Back home, lying in bed, I was too tired to talk and idly flipped through Rosie's phone without any particular purpose. She probably thought I was upset after seeing Vicky and remembering the unpleasant past, so she came over, held my hand, and softly apologized. "I'm sorry I was late." At that moment, I inadvertently came across an old photo in her album from years ago. The person in it was me. In my 3rd year at university, I had tutored a secondary school student in English. Her parents were divorced and she lived with her mother, who was too busy with her career to give her daughter any affection beyond academic matters. She needed English tutoring, but it was really just a ploy to get her mother's attention by deliberately performing poorly. So my role was less of a tutor and more of a companion. On our last lesson, which happened to be her birthday, I didn't know her preferences, so I chose an orange-flavored cake. She didn't eat much of it, and I thought she didn't like it. But when we were saying goodbye at the end of the session, She solemnly told me. I really liked it. That student was Rosie. The photo was of me eating cake, secretly taken by propping her phone against a textbook. Actually, I recognized her the first time I saw her at the company. What surprised me was that not only had she secretly photographed me back then, but she had kept the photo for so long. My heart fluttered, and I wasn't sure if her "I was late" referred to not coming out of the private room earlier to leave with me, or not finding me before Vicky had hurt me. But it didn't matter. I squeezed her hand and smiled at her. Not late, just perfect timing. The night breeze was cool, the moonlight gentle, and my love was by my side. Everything was just perfect.